It's just spinning now. It's just preparing to live stream. I think we've got about 60 people registered for it tonight. So
oh, that's good. I'm going to promote this book, by the way.
Just spinning now. Let's just mute that.
John's there.
John's on the phone. He's muted. He's muted.
All right.
We'll wait to see a few more people come in. John, he's gone.
Yeah.
Putting his phone down. I'll let John introduce if he wishes to, because he's being president, and I'll finish off.
I don't know whether Paul's making it or not. So normally Paul does the, as you know, the moderating of questions. But maybe if Paul isn't here, John could do that.
John, are you going?
Muted.
Are you muted? Still muted. There you are.
Yep.
John.
I'm talking now.
Are you going to introduce Nick?
I'm happy to introduce. I'm not entirely familiar with the process of, somebody puts up a hand or whatever to ask a question.
Paul does that. Paul will do that.
Paul will do that. Will it?
Yeah,
Paul will do that. And
we instruct that people leave questions till the end. They don't interrupt the speaker.
Yeah. Oh, yes, absolutely.
They can type questions in. They can type questions in whilst I'm talking, and then Paul will go through the list.
It is now 7
No, it was the actual sort of handling the response and then the next question.
Paul moderates that, and I'll finish and I'll do the summing up. All right.
Yeah.
Jed, are you going to do the housekeeping?
Yeah, I'll get that going.
Sorry, we waited for Jed to.
We're just doing the housekeeping.
Rightio. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Yes.
Oh, that's good.
Oh no, gone.
I like that picture. That's better than my title page.
I've got a few of you, Nick, doing it. Well, good evening, all. So just give a bit of housekeeping before we get going and we introduce our speaker this evening. So we're doing this through a Zoom webinar. Hopefully we're all getting rather familiar with these now. We've done a fair few of them, but unlike your normal Zoom accounts, you can't see the whole audience. So don't worry if you're having your dinner or something, we can't see you eating. If you have any questions throughout the evening, please use the Q&A function. Type your question in there, and hopefully at the end we'll be able to unmute you and we'll be able to either read out your question or you can read it to us. If you're having any problems, usually the first thing to check is make sure that your speakers are turned on, that you've got them at the right sort of level for the event this evening. If you're having trouble seeing anything but you can hear us, probably the best thing to do is just leave Zoom and then rejoin on the link that you used. That usually clears up most of the problems. I will be checking Facebook and Twitter intermediately, so if there's any problems, just let us know on there or use the chat function on Zoom. And lastly, if you absolutely can't get it to work on Zoom, we are streaming live on YouTube, so you can join us there as well. And we will have that up for a period of time afterwards as well. I shall stop sharing that now and hand us back over to Paul, who's gone green for some reason.
Yes, I can see that I'm gone green. I don't know why. No idea.
I hope it's not
you were flashing.
Men in Crimea.
Well,
nothing happening here. I'll stop my video, I think.
Looks like a loose connection to me.
Yeah, it might be. I'll just check. I'll hide myself and fiddle about with these wires at the back.
Are we ready to kick off now, Jed?
Yes, absolutely. You introduce Nick for us then, John.
Righto. Good evening, everybody. This is a rather special presentation tonight because this is the presidential address of the 2022 AGM. Now, a number of us, and sadly a small number of us, have already seen this. I say sadly a small number because I would exhort those of you who weren't at the AGM, if you get the chance to join us live at our meetings, it does provide a rather special environment in which you can talk and interact with the speaker. And that was the environment we enjoyed when Nick made this presentation in December, last December. I thoroughly sort of recommend this as an enlightening talk. It's many of us have worked at quite a detailed level in our areas of geology, and this is on one occasion when we've got somebody who is very familiar with the detail, but is deliberately standing back and taking a broad view of that very special time, which was the Carboniferous. And this, as Nick says, a helicopter view, but it is very important from time to time to see this in the round, in the bigger picture. I think at that point I will stop. In terms of introduction, I should add that Nick, as retiring president, now vice president, has also valiantly picked up the job of treasurer to the society. It's a role which is mandatory, important that we do it, but it is rather exceptional that in the case equally of the acting general secretary and now the treasurer, the president has to step into these roles. So I'm repeating something you're all familiar with from hearing from me, that we are in a difficult situation if we do not get members of the society who step up to fill these roles. So please recognize that what we're getting here is a presentation from the retiring president, vice president, treasurer of the society, and now giving us an overall view of the Carboniferous. So if I can hand over to Nick. Thank you, Nick, and I hope it goes as well as it did at the AGM, which was very stimulating.
Thank you. Could I ask that anybody who wants to ask questions whilst I'm presenting, type them into the chat or the Q&A feature, which should be on the bar at the bottom of your Zoom page. And at the end, Paul Hildreth will moderate and go through, because sometimes several questions can be about the same thing. And he will either read them out or invite, I don't know whether we can do that, but we'll invite those of you asking questions to unmute and ask your question directly. And I'll try and answer them. And if I can't answer them, I will tell you I can't, but I'll say, I think I can find out where you can find the answer. A couple of things before we start. I want you to remember this in my talk, because once I go on full screen, I won't be able to keep flipping between you seeing me and what I've got in my hand. Can anyone tell me what they think this is? It's about the width of my wrist bone there, look. It's from the Carboniferous. Anyway, type in what you think it is and remember this image, because we're going to come back to it during my talk. Also, I want to promote this fabulous book, and it's all about dragonflies, modern ones. It's an atlas of dragonflies of the British Isles. It includes Great Britain and Ireland. It is a fantastic book, and I hope when you've seen this talk, you'll get a renewed interest in dragonflies, and you can explore what flew around in the Carboniferous and what was invented in the Carboniferous. And a helicopter view is quite descriptive about what dragonflies do. They are helicopters and much more. Anyway, promote this book. It's a fabulous book, and it's from the, I can't remember what they're called now. Hang on. Atlas of British Dragonflies, and it's from the, it's one of the societies, which I'm trying to find. Oh, well, it's the British Dragonfly Society, and it's funded also by the Field Studies Council and the Joint Nature Conservation Committee, Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, which is part of NERC, and BRC, which is, I can hardly read it, Biological Research Council. Brilliant book. If you love dragonflies, if you want to buy a nice Valentine's present for your lover who loves natural history, this might be a good one before all the dragonflies start to hatch out. Okay, let's move on. I've got no financial interest, by the way, in that book. Just to declare. Right, share screen I need to do. Here we go. That's enough of the promos. Where do I go? Here we go. Okay. So I won't, you've seen the title page, so we'll go straight into my talk. I'm just going to try and bring it up as a full screen. Come on. There we go. So before I talk about what was going on in the Carboniferous, a little bit of background, because I know many of you will not be familiar with the Carboniferous to a great extent, but it's important that we do understand a bit about it. And so I hope this introduction will help you set the scene for what you're about to hear. So basically, I'm actually going to start just below the Carboniferous in the system below it, which is the Devonian system, the age of fishes. And the Carboniferous is now split into two subsystems, which are both given American names in global chronostratigraphy. So we're talking about time here. We're not talking about biostratigraphy. We're talking about definitions in time through the period, which is the Carboniferous. So you have the Mississippian and the Pennsylvanian. So this tends to be predominantly carbonates. This all tends to be predominant coal bearing as a simplification. And here is where traditionally right across North America, there is an unconformity. These things are called global special stratigraphic points. And these are reference points in time where all the best stratigraphers who know the Carboniferous decide a special point in a pile of rocks at some point on Earth where they will define this point in time. And this one is at Arrow Canyon, which is in Nevada. It's very close to Las Vegas. And it's in a carbonate platform. When they wanted to put this stratotype in, I was wet behind the ears, very young at the BGS, early 1980s, said, no way should you put a global stratotype on a carbonate platform in the Carboniferous, because sea level's going up and down like a yo-yo, glacier and static. Every carbonate platform will have breaks in it, and a global stratigraphic special point shouldn't have a sedimentary break in it, not one that, you know, lacks significant time. And it was put through as a stratotype. It all got ratified. Then I turned up, and exactly as I predicted, I hadn't seen this section before it all got ratified. I found about 4 major breaks in sequence with paleosols that none of the geologists from all over the world and the American geologists had recognized, or if they had recognized, they kept quiet about them. So there are major problems with this thing even today. The Visayan may have a problem, I'm not sure. I was involved in that one. I've been on the outcrop in China before it was ratified. I'm a co-author of that outcrop, but it is a bit odd. It's a natural outcrop. It's not in a quarry. And as you know, you look at natural outcrops, you can't tell in limestones what's really going on unless you look at it with lots of thin sections or drill a borehole through it. But that's based on the entrance of a particular foraminiferan, which is a very shallow water foraminiferan, and an evolutionary lineage of this thing called Eoparistophylla. It's trying to follow the original definition of the base Visayan, which was originally in Belgium at Visé, which is a lovely place to visit if you ever go. And that's where Ralph Corneille defined the first entry of that particular foraminiferan to be defining the base of the Visayan. Problem is, it's a turbidite sequence, and you don't really know whether the fossil is reworked or not. So that's a carbonate turbidite sequence, deep water. So you've had avalanches of lime mud and debris and shells and microfossils tumbling down a slope into a basin. It's a fabulous section, but you have to be really cautious about looking at stuff trying to work out whether it's contemporary or whether it's being carried in from outside. And a similar problem is with the base of the Tenasian, which is defined in a beautiful vineyard in the Montagne Noire in southern France, which I've been to, and it's a fabulous place to visit. But again, it's in turbidites. So there's all sorts of worries that the microfossils which are used there, in this case, it's a conodont, have been reworked. And conodonts in particular are very durable. In fact, here in the Nottingham area where I live, you can find Devonian conodonts of perfect preservation in the late Triassic in the Rhaetian. And you wouldn't even know they were reworked. And they were published by the late, Nottingham University, I'm trying to remember his name now, the micropaleontologist there, flipping heck, I should know his name. He first described the conodont animal as well. Oh dear, never mind, my brain's going to come back later. One of you could remind me. So this global stratigraphic point has a problem. This may have a problem. This does have a problem, and I won't bother with the later ones. But the problem is these are in Russia, and you probably can't access them now. And so, you know, that's another point about global stratotypes. They might appear to be the best sections in the world, but if you can't access them, if the global community cannot access them, I think they shouldn't be there. Well, you know, we need redefining stratotypes where they're accessible. If you look at the world at the time, there's no Atlantic Ocean, and we are of this big continent, La Russia. So this is the Mississippian here, which we would call the Carboniferous limestone in this country. And you can see little old England here, right on the equator. And if we go up further into the Pennsylvanian, which means little old England is on the equator still, and this is when the coal measures, what we call our coal measures, were laid down. So there's no Atlantic Ocean. There were marine incursions through this region here, and this ocean here, Paleotethys, was closing, and the closure of that ocean caused Dartmoor to appear, and the big granite plutons all along Brittany and northwest France were emplaced during the closure of the ocean there. And that cut the UK off from the sea during the later coal measure period. Above the Cambriense marine band, we don't see any marine incursions in the British Carboniferous. So, but elsewhere, obviously marine sequences went on and on, particularly in northern Spain and places like that. And we have Pangaea, which is the big continent other than La Russia, and it was the collision of Pangaea and La Russia, which eventually formed the big supercontinent. And this is a period where we go from, yes, probably at the late Tenasian, there was a big sea level fall, about 120 meters, so that suggests there was a large polar ice cap forming on Gondwana at that time. But it isn't really until the upper Carboniferous that we really start to get intense glaciation of the planet. And glaciation of this planet is quite rare in geological time. And we are currently in one of these cold phases now. We are living in a glaciation period, but normally the planet isn't glaciated. So there are parallels between the Carboniferous and now, with glacials and interglacials, fluctuating sea levels, and of course now with the threat of the global warming that we are accelerating through our emissions of greenhouse gases, sea level rise due to ice cap melt is a big issue that's, you know, facing our and future generations. So I will now move on. Hope you captured most of that. So going back down to that boundary between the Carboniferous and the Devonian, John Marshall, Southampton University, is a palynologist, expert on Devonian palynomorphs. These are spores that come from plants that were living in the Devonian. And the fact is that the Devonian really started to have extinctions in a stepwise way from the Middle Devonian onwards. And it would appear that one of the perturbations in the Devonian was the arrival of trees and the arrival of lignin, which I think I put in a president's words some time ago in our newsletter, that land plants were pre-adapted to develop lignin, just to develop something else that when the plants were all marine, had developed to, when they were planktonic, developed to protect them from UV radiation. And you only need to develop that biology, biochemistry in a plant to then produce lignin, believe it or not. And that happened in the Devonian. And once you've got lignin, you can build a tree and you can start to put roots down, and those roots can penetrate into rocks and break them up. And that intensifies weathering, clearly. And the trees get more and more efficient at photosynthesis, and they grow bigger and bigger and bigger. And that starts to perturb the atmosphere because the trees draw down oxygen, lock up carbon in their wood and the lignin, and therefore you start to get global cooling. So we're starting to see in the Devonian a massive change in the nutrient cycle between the terrestrial biosphere and the ocean because of different forms of land runoff, etc., etc. And we're also seeing massive changes in the atmosphere because these plants are drawing down more and more CO2. And they're giving off other things as well, which affect the weather and help rainfall happen, blah, 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 which I won't go into right now. But what is really weird is at the end of the Devonian, the trees seem to have got wiped out. And you can see this event. It's actually used by many palynologists to define the end Devonian, the last appearance of a particular spore. And there's a sequence of fossil lake sediments in Greenwood that Marshall and his colleagues looked at. And in the late Devonian, below in the earliest parts of the lake sediments, which is latest Devonian, you get these beautiful spores. They're lovely amber color. So that means they've not been buried very deep or heated up in the earth. So they haven't gone through into a gas phase in terms of a source rock. And you go up through the sequence where you would expect things to get cooler as you climb up through a sequence, and you find these very dark spores that clearly something has happened. This is not normal. There's no intrusions of igneous rock that could account for this dark color. Normally you get darkening the more the rock has been cooked as it's been buried. You know, normally you'd be seeing this in a dry gas phase, in a oil, you know, in a gas shell. But this is nothing to do with burial in the earth. This is all to do with something that was damaging the spores on the trees and wiping them out. And then you gradually see a return above that to these amber colors again. So these authors proposed that this major mass extinction, which is the final extinction of lots of extinctions in the late Devonian period from, you know, extending down from the mid Devonian, where we lose loads of stuff, corals, stromatoporoids, lots of trilobites, lots of ammonoids, lots of fish die out, massive changes. And they explain this from a rise in elevated UVB radiation. And that damages trees and it damages their ability to create these spores. And looking at mercury data in the sediments suggests this is not from some volcanic disaster, you know, major volcanic eruption or something like that. So there's no planetary scale volcanic eruptions. Excuse me, I've got this terrible cough that's since Christmas from, thank you, grandchildren, which I'm still suffering from. But this terrestrial mass extinction event was coincident with a major climatic warming that ended the intense final glacial cycle of the latest Devonian. So they were thinking, you know, this is due to global warming, that the stratosphere has been perturbed so that UVB radiation could get down to the surface of the Earth at a level that damaged plants. We've all heard about the ozone hole just recently in the news, and the fact that we seem to be of managing to almost overcome now the ozone hole problems from our pollution, that that's been going up, these CFCs that are damaging the ozone layer. But that's another story as well. So they see this as a mechanism explaining this was ozone layer reduction during rapid warming, increasing convective transport of these ions from seawater up into the higher atmosphere, and hence ozone loss during rapid warming as an inherent Earth system process. And they go on to warn this is a warning what we might be doing by warming the Earth up too fast, too rapidly. But there's another theory which came out from Fields et al. At about the same time, just after the Marshall et al. Paper. So they were aware of that, and they decided, no, this is much more likely to be from a supernova, and an exploding supernova, which would bombard our atmosphere and damage our stratosphere, and therefore radiation from the supernova plus radiation from our own sun was getting down onto the terrestrial biosphere and onto the ocean surface as well. Anything living in the plankton there would be affected. And so this is their theory. So no one knows yet which one's right or were they coincident. Did this thing cause the warming? It doesn't, it seems to be an open question at the moment, but this is another explanation. And they think that this wasn't enough to wipe out life on Earth, clearly, but it was enough to really cause trouble for plants and things living on the surface of the ocean and things like that. So obviously all your primary producers are going to get affected. That's going to affect ecosystems, etc., etc. So they reckon it was 20, I can't remember what this is called, this unit now, but it's 3.6 light years each of those. So they're looking at something about 75 light years away exploding, somewhat beyond the kill distance, as they say, that would precipitate a full mass extinction. So this, such nearby supernovae are likely to be due to core collapses of massive stars. These are concentrated in the thin galactic disk where our sun resides. So it was something where our sun was at the time. So that wipeout meant that particularly the early Carboniferous, what we would call the Carboniferous limestone, was depleted in many things that failed to survive from the Devonian into the Carboniferous. So there was a long period of recovery, which explains some of the weird things you see about the Carboniferous limestone, particularly the Turnasian Carboniferous limestone. You will see very few colonial corals, and when you do, there'll be tabloid corals that look like little honeycombs, Mitchellina type things. You see lots of horn corals, but you won't find big reef building corals. Also, what you'll find in this interval here is obviously the trilobites only just got across there, but you'll see a rapid radiation of trilobites, some deep water forms which mimic Ordovician deep water forms, and some which are more shallower water forms, but they're all proetids and brachymatopids and funny little spiny, very specialized trilobites. But the phacopids had all gone, the dalmanitids, all that lot gone. And the ammonoids, they also evolved very rapidly. You've lost all the clymeniids and only one ammonoid clade. It's a bit like the end Permian, where one ammonoid clade gets across the extinction event, and then that becomes the thing that radiates to everything that went on after it. But another thing you see in the lower Carboniferous particularly is the abundance of crinoids. So this is why some people call this interval the age of sea lilies. That's the common name for what crinoids look like. And it's interesting to think, why is that? And what the theory is that the Durophagous fishes, and a Durophagous fish would be like today our modern parrotfish. These are fishes with strong jaws, and they eat organisms with skeletons, particularly skeletons that have soft tissues inside them, because that's where you're going to get the nutrient from. and then all the stuff poos out the back. And that's why you get these beautiful white coral sand beaches in the tropics. All of that stuff will have been through a parrotfish's gut. So basically, you're sunbathing in the Bahamas and you're on parrotfish poo. Just think of that when you're there, those of you who can afford to go there. But anyway, I can't. But why so many crinoids thrive in the lower Carboniferous? And I showed you that big crinoid stem before I showed my screen of this talk. And I want you to hold that again in your memory. But we have different types of crinoids that all burst in huge abundance, and particularly in the late Triasian. So those of you in our neck of the woods up in northern England, you'd be well aware of Clitheroe. All the really good crinoid sites in the Clitheroe area are all in this maximum diversity of camerat crinoids here. You'll also notice these things called the advanced cladids, and they also diversify, but not like the camerates did, but they keep going, and the camerates gradually fall away, particularly once we get into what we call our millstone grit and coal measures, and become, very low in diversity towards the end of the Carboniferous. Well, actually, not in the coal measures we're talking about, excuse me, the above the Grassington grit here, Serpicovian. Calingense marine band is roughly the base of the Serpicovian. And so anyway, there we go. But it's due to fishes that eat, these are sharks mainly, that ate organisms with calcareous skeletons, and crinoids are a dead sitter for that. Interestingly, these cladids became the stem that went through to all the modern day crinoids, and they developed, sorry, the cladids are these here. The cladids have developed an ability to move around, and some of them have lost their stems and they can swim away from predators, whereas the camerates were rooted to the seabed. So that also, they were a sitting target. So fishes gradually evolved through the Triasian, and new fishes that started to be gyrophagous appeared and then started preying on particularly on the camerates, and that's why they suddenly fall away. So this is Salt Hill Quarry time here, across this interval just here. Let's go down. So I told you about the end of the Devonian meant the trees virtually wiped out. I mean, plants that produce lignin obviously survived, and there are clades of plants that cross the Devonian Carboniferous boundary, which then blossomed back into arborescent growth. So we do see through the Carboniferous, not much in the Triasian, but as you will have noticed, you get into the Visaean, you find a lot more plant material, particularly in basin deposits. So if you look at the Worston shales, you'll find lots of branches of plants that clearly, and planks of wood. And if you go into places like the Moscow Basin, there are coal seams that are worked of Arundian age, that's Middle Visaean. So that's the same age as the rocks at Arnside Knot on the beach. If you're wondering what age that is. So gradually plants start to re-establish, and we start to get back to rainforests and a great radiation of plants. And many of the clades that have gone through to today's plants were all evolved at this time. So just to show you an example, as I did this talk around Christmas, I thought to talk about a gymnosperm, because Christmas trees are gymnosperms. These are some of the earliest gymnosperm bracts. And also on here are some, on the next slides, I'll show you some modern analogues of this particular gymnosperm. This is a paper by Challoner et al., and it's from an open cast site, which I think might be buried now under the M1 extension up to the A1 that goes via Swillington. This was an open cast site at Swillington, hence it's called Swillingtonia, just east of Leeds. And it's from the middle coal measures. And they were looking for spores and things and sieving and breaking down rocks for spore samples. And in the coarser grade fractions of the shales that they were sieving, they found these carbonized remains, perfectly preserved from forest fires in these rainforests. Rainforests get dry seasons, and they do get forest fires in rainforests. They're not always wet all year round. And this just goes to show forest fires are natural events, which is why a big paper came out today by Oxford University on carbon capture, and it's all talking about forests and storing carbon. But if you don't put the forests in the right place, and if they burn down, then they're very leaky. And people don't seem to realize this. That's quite apart from man-made causes of forests setting on fire, etc., etc. But anyway, I digress. That's a story for another time. But these carbonized leaf bracts are amazing, because you can see right down to cellular detail. You can see stomata and all sorts of features. So you imagine these are almost like pine needles. They're not quite, but perhaps a juniper leaf more like. But you can see the stomata here in modern ones, and in I've coloured some of these. I can't see because the zoom blocks off parts of my screen. I'm sorry. But some of these are modern and ancient comparing. There's the ancient from Swillington, there's the modern. And you can see they're so similar. It's absolutely incredible. And the exquisite preservation. Here we go, coming in. That's a modern one, the green one. And these are the fossil ones. Absolutely fantastic. So these are the very first gymnosperms, not fir trees, but the clade of trees that are eventually arose to fir trees, and your monkey puzzle trees in the Jurassic, the ginkgos that get arose in the Triassic, and many of you may have in your garden. Here we are looking at the trachea inside the wood, and you can see all the features. These are the modern ones with the green stars. These are the ancient ones. Absolutely incredible. And another thing that happens, once we colonize the land with trees, they get washed down rivers in flood events, and they get carried out to sea, or they may even just drop in the sea from coastal erosion during a transgression, when we remember sea level was going up and down very rapidly because of glacier used to sea. That then allows a whole new fauna to live in the sea, attached, and crossing the ocean. So this is how the Galapagos Islands, for instance, were probably populated, particularly by terrestrial vertebrates, by them getting a ride on a log from South America out to the Galapagos. But a whole host of organisms will live in the shadow of a floating log and attached to it. These are the sea lilies attached here. These are much thinner. These are the inaginate forms, not the camerates. Are much more lightly built. And lots of algae and bivalves attached to here. So you'd have your nautiloids. The very first squids appeared in the Carboniferous. One advantage of not having an external hard shell, but making your shell internal, is you can cover it in skin, and that protects the shell from damage. You can grow much bigger as well, because if you're wearing a suit of armor like a big shell, there's a maximum size you can get to, because these things are very heavy. I know they've got buoyancy devices, but they still have quite an inertia. There's a lot of mineralization you have to put into them. That takes a lot of biological energy to do it. And you can't change the color. It's what it is. Once a nautilus has these colors on its shell, that's it. It's stuck with them. Squids, as you well know, and it must have seen in wildlife programs, octopuses, cuttlefish, they can change their colors. They can flash them on and off, do all sorts of things, and they can even go bioluminescent and shine in the dark. So the Carboniferous is the oldest squid, comes from the Carboniferous, and they eventually, you see them in the Mesozoic as belemnites, and now we see them as the modern squid, just with a chitinous internal skeleton, no calcium carbonate in it at all. The cuttlefish is somewhere in between. That does have a skeleton in it, which has very reduced tiny chambers. this is the thing you give to your budgerigar to sharpen its beak. And the very weird spirula, which has a shell like a nautilus, but it's all internal, which if you go down to the Canary Islands and you've got a sharp eye and you look at the high tide mark after a spring tide, if you're lucky, you might see some washed up, the shells, not the animals. But the most fascinating thing, and I think all related to trees again, was the appearance of animal flight. And these are from Europe, some of them from Germany. I think they're nearly all from Germany. This is a paper by Carsten and Bridget Broutman, who used to have a dog called Backups, funny. But here we are, where there's the Donantian. So this is the Carboniferous limestone. Here's the Namurian, which is the millstone grit. So we're not even in the coal measures here. And we've got the mid-Carboniferous boundary, Mississippian, Pennsylvanian, just here on the top of the Arnsbergian, and this would be called the Serpicovian down here. But lots of insect records. I've never found any insects in Arnhem. I've looked very hard, and I've seen many, many borehole cores. Never found them. So I don't know why they're finding them in Germany and Belgium, and they're not finding them here. They must be here. So there's a challenge for the field season coming up. Find some insects, please. Maybe people are thinking they're bits of plant leaves when they see the wings. I don't know. But the interesting thing is when they appear for the first time in the fossil record, it's in the millstone grit, just on, well, the Grassington grit is there, top Grassington grit. And here would be the top of the rough rock. You get these beautiful damselfly-like wings, very advanced, you know, when you think we don't see an insect before, a flying insect before this time. So I think animal flight, lots of the trees got going again. I think lots of insects which were flightless discovered how to fly. And once they discovered how to fly, they dispersed very rapidly because then they could be carried over long distances. And even today, we can get locusts blown across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa into the Americas, you know, in storms. So you can see why even it might have only been a small population in some very remote place where that cracked it how to grow wings and fly. But once they could, it was boom time, you know, a bit like cheap air flight today. You could fly everywhere. But the really fantastic things that are unique to the Carboniferous are the biggest dragonflies ever to live on Earth. In fact, the biggest flying insects ever to live on Earth. And there's a famous one from the coal measures in Derbyshire, from Bolsover. It's actually called the Beast of Bolsover. I'm not talking about a Labour MP who also took on the name. I'm talking about something much more ancient than him. I think he's dead now, but I'm not sure. I better be careful to check on that. But we're talking about these massive predatory dragonflies from the Carboniferous, and they start to appear in our coal measures. So I think the ones from Bolsover, I think, are from what we used to call Westphalian B, which would be now Duckmantian. And the first ones were found in France. And you can see quite a lot of detail. Here's the head. You've got very large eyes with 360-degree vision. So clearly a predator, very well developed eyes. And I'll go back to eyes later on in this talk. But this is a very advanced insect. Here's another specimen. You're talking about a wingspan of about a meter or more. Huge thing. And that's a reconstruction, which they say there's a scale bar, but they never put it on in this paper, which I put not actually included in the paper. Editors, please note, check things like that. But it looks just like a modern dragonfly in many, many respects, and live like a modern dragonfly as a predator. Modern dragonflies are predatory. They catch other insects on the wing. And you might want to know, well, why do they have these 4 wings? And that's a good question too. And how could they grow so large? Well, the reason they have 4 wings, one of them is it improves efficiency of flight. So it's a bit like people in the Tour de France with the bicycles. You always have a leading bike, and then you have following in the team in the slipstream of the leading bike. Well, it's the same with dragonfly wings. You've got 2 pairs of wings, so you can use the slipstream off the first pair of wings, and you slightly change the phase of the second pair, and it can get an extra push, harvest that energy, the little vortexes that come off the front wings, and improve the efficiency. And they reckon that dragonflies, this is about modern dragonflies, they reckon that dragonfly wing design it reduces the power requirements of the muscles by 22% compared to the dipterans, like a bluebottle. They only have 1 pair of wings. I know what someone's going to ask is, why do dipterans only have two wings and dragonflies 4 then? So 4-winged flight has a big advantage for dragonflies because they minimize energy wastage in flying, and they are long distance flyers, particularly the dragonflies. They can quite easily cross large bodies of water. They can use thunderstorms and weather systems to migrate. And you perhaps notice sometimes when we get an August storm plume coming up from the continent, how suddenly you see lots of dragonflies around after them, and that's because they've migrated using those storm fronts. There's lots of other things about dragonfly wings as well, which I can go into. But before we go into why are they so large in the Carboniferous, you've got to understand how insects breathe, and they don't have lungs. They have tiny tubes that open to the outside air, and those tubes innervate the muscles, the flight muscles, and all the other muscles in any insect. The problem is that those tubes rely on diffusion. So oxygen can only get down those tubes mainly by using diffusion. It's not like us where we can pump air in and out of our lungs. And it's certainly not like a bird, where birds are very clever. They can pump air through their lungs and flush it out completely. We have a volume of air in our lungs called tidal air. It's a bit like buffer gas in an underground gas storage. You need a certain amount of gas there to keep the thing under pressure. Same with our lungs, otherwise they collapse. But birds are very clever at putting air right through the lungs, which is why they can fly at very high altitudes, fly over the Himalayas and things like that. You wouldn't get a dragonfly doing that. But that's another story as well about physiology. But insects are limited. One of the limiting sizes, things that limits their size, particularly a flying insect, is how quickly you can get oxygen to your muscles to generate energy. Hence, that 20% efficiency gain is obviously very important for flying that dragonflies have. But also, you don't see dragonflies as big as that today. Now, one of the reasons is the oxygen levels in the Carboniferous were much higher than today. Now, there are lots of people doing black box things, and they come with all sorts of different predictions. Some saying, no, they were similar today, slightly below, not far above today, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually start to look at the biology of things that have limited ways of respiring to keep their tissues alive and working, then and these are animals that still live today and use the same techniques, that gives you some pretty good boundaries as to what the limitations are of how they live to respire. So remember the crinoid I showed you at the beginning of my talk, the width of my wrist? Crinoids have a skeleton inside them that's living. It's like our bone. It has cells in it. We have cells called osteoblasts in our bone, and they're constantly maintaining our bones and replenishing our bones. Our bones are living things. I'm not just talking about the marrow inside our bones. Might go into that later on when we talk about blood. But so we have to be able to get oxygen into our bones, otherwise the bone dies. And if the bone dies, it gets infected and all horrible things happen to you. Same in an echinoderm. They have to be able to get oxygen through their entire skeleton, but echinoderms again, don't have they don't have blood, they don't have a circulatory system. They do have a lumen at the hole in the middle of a crinoid stem through which seawater would pass. That can put oxygen to, make oxygen available for the whole network, like a big sponge of tiny cells that are inside the crinoid stereum. But there's a maximum distance size you can get to, which relates to how much oxygen is available. And there's no way you could have a crinoid stem in today's environment with dissolved oxygen in the levels in our seawater, even in the Arctic regions, Antarctic regions, as cold seawater holds more oxygen. It's just a no-brainer that oxygen levels in the Carboniferous, by the time we get to the late Ternasian, we're getting high. And that's why these large dragonflies could fly around. The other reason they could fly around was they were the only things flying. So there was nothing could prey on them. And it's only later on when we start to see birds appearing, and I think pterosaurs, the early pterosaurs too, were insectivorous, that we start to see that never again did dragonflies ever get so big. So that's what this paper's about here. Ignore these oxygen levels. These are the ones from black box stuff, which that one might be right, but this is not right. This is far too low. But this is actually where we do see the really biggest Carboniferous, biggest dragonflies into the early Permian and late Carboniferous. Once we get up into the Mesozoic, we don't see really large dragonflies. And even if they could grow to this size, they wouldn't, because there's bird predation and there's also pterosaur predation. Insects are very nutritious to eat, as John the Baptist found out. Many people eat locusts to this day. The fascinating thing is that the emergence of powered animal flight in the Millstone Grit in the Namurian, as I said, the oldest stuff just above the Grassington Grit equivalent, it wasn't until the very late Triassic that the first pterosaurs appeared, and they evolved from ground-based reptiles that were insectivorous. You can see this from their teeth. We've only just been discovered the oldest pterosaurs and their forebearers in China. And I'm sure that those very early pterosaurs, they were quite small and they were after dragonflies and other flying insects. But for 100 million years, the only powered flight were insects. Even across the Permian-Triassic boundary, they survived all that. Nothing else managed to learn powered flight. I've no doubt some things learn to glide, like gliding lizards we have today and gliding squirrels, but that's really not powered flight. It's just leaping off a tree or a cliff and gliding down with, membranes between you. There's a flying frog, membranes between your fingers or your digits, or membranes between your limbs, but not flapping. So I find that absolutely amazing. So I'd said that you could call the Devonian the age of fishes, or I may have said it, but one of the common names for the Devonian is the age of fishes. And I've told you that the Carboniferous, the lower part's called the age of sea lilies, and the upper part is called the age of coal or rainforests. But really, the Carboniferous is the age of insects. All the insects that we see today, all the clades, for the most diverse invertebrates, probably the most species actually of organisms which aren't microorganisms, are insects living today. And it all starts in the Carboniferous. It's where the really big clades start out. So if you look at Mipteroid insects, and this is annoying because I can't see the other. I wonder, how do I minimize this bit? I can't see my slide very well. Oh, that's no good. I didn't want that. Let's go on to the next slide. Anyway, I can't see what's on the right, but you can. At the bottom, there's shield bugs, for instance. These are mainly bugs. Wait on, I need to go back up. They're mainly bugs on here. And once you've got trees, you've got bugs that live on them. Trees and suck the sap and things like that. And lice, and you get parasitic lice, bark lice. Here's the Devonian, here's the Carboniferous. But just look at the branching out in the Carboniferous of many of these stem clades that go right up here to things that live today. And on the right, which I can't see, all the cartoons of the different insects. Thrips are down here. I'm not an entomologist, so I don't know what all these terms mean, but just look at the diversity. I know they say you shouldn't show lots of detail on PowerPoint, but what I'm trying to get over to you is the massive diversity of today's insects. Most of the clades are rooted in the Carboniferous. Yes, obviously they come through from the Devonian. And these things here, Paleoptera, yeah, that's not actually true. There isn't a Devonian winged insect. That's been proven not to be winged. But anyway, that's something else. And if we look at the mitochondrial phylogenomics, when an animal has reproduces, the egg has an organ in it which is not in the nucleus, called the mitochondrion, and that relates to, at some point in time when animals and plants evolved, or the first cells evolved, bacteria were symbiotic with the first cells and whatever organism formed the nucleus, and the bacteria become the mitochondria, and they're the power plants of the cell. They do all the energy conversion to keep the cell running, and they have their own DNA, so they always pass through the mother, and the DNA is much more stable than the DNA in the nucleus, which is the real driver of evolutionary change. And so you can look at mitochondrial DNA, and that can help you look at the linkages where things split off in evolutionary trees. So you get the same picture looking at that. And they know the time. This is sort of way, don't know how they do it, the big data people, but they know how long it takes for DNA in mitochondria generally to change over time. So you can start to see, looking at relationships of the mitochondrial DNA, how it's changed. You can start to predict when the change occurred where a clade split. Sorry, this cold's getting me again. But here we are, there's the Devonian, here's the Carboniferous. So there seems to be a single mitochondrial clade, and then in the Carboniferous it goes boom. And by the end of the Carboniferous, we've already created all these stems here, which then go to all the modern stuff here. Quite amazing. Here's the Paleocene, Neogene here, Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic. Here's the Perma-Triassic extinction, which again became another extinction events are always drivers for diversity as niches are opened up after an extinction for other entrants to come in and take up the niche that the old things died out, like the dinosaurs died out, like we will die out eventually. Cockroaches, termites, they all started in the Carboniferous. You can see all the clades here. I don't know whether you like cockroaches. I think they're amazing things. And let's keep going. Hang on, wrong way. Here's some cockroach fossils from the Carboniferous, and you can actually look at their stratigraphy. So here we are. This is Westphalian A, the Lancetian. This is Westphalian B, Duckmantian, Westphalian C. This would be the Igorrhea marine band here. And a lot of these things are in coal measures where here in the UK, we don't have very many sequences. But these things can be found, particularly down here, can be found in the British coal measures. But you get these are all cockroach wings. This is one of the first ones that was found. And at first they thought it was a leaf of a plant. They didn't realize it was an insect leaf. It's first described in 1839 as a plant, Dictyopteris didyma. Now they know it's a cockroach wing. So again, cockroaches, beetles, beetles didn't appear in 1963 at the Cavern Club. They actually appeared in the Carboniferous. And here they are all just whoosh. So you can see all the major clades for all the beetles that exist now. Beetles are really important in nutrient recycling, particularly eating vegetable waste in forests and things like that. If we didn't have beetles, we wouldn't have lots of stuff, nutrient recycling. Forests wouldn't be able to survive. Here's the Carboniferous here, right down at the bottom in grey. If I can get my mouse there, I'll do it. Oh, this is easier. There we go. There's the Carboniferous, Permian, Triassic, Jurassic, Cretaceous. Here's the Paleogene, Neogene, Quaternary. So again, it's looking at mitochondria and creating very similar things, looking at the genomics, looking at modern biology and all this magical stuff we can now do, looking at genomics. Get a very, very similar pattern, and then predicting in time where it all goes back to. In fact, here they think it goes back a bit further into the Devonian than the fossil record suggests. Butterflies, what beautiful things they are. They all start, the clades that led to the butterflies and moths all started in the Carboniferous, way back here. Here we are, we're just in the upper Carboniferous. I can't see that bit because I'm screen sharing and all the menu bars in the way. But look at the diversity of all the butterflies. And again, you're getting parallel evolution, these beautiful swallowtail type designs. And yeah, fabulous sort of lace-wingy things there. So going into other modern, hang on. We see, oh yes, sorry, got this wrong. What's happened here? It's jumped, that's what I, so going into other things that happened in the Carboniferous rainforest. You live in a dense rainforest and you you want to attract a mate. You can use pheromones, I suppose. So you scent, you know, your scent. But another very good way is sound. And now we have evidence that the first insects that could stridulate appeared in the Carboniferous. This was an evolutionary thing where wings were adapted not only for flight, but also to flash light by reflecting light. So the wing on the right here, you can see all these reflecting bars. This is a modern insect wing. And then we look at the ancient in the Carboniferous and we see the same. And also you see structures which create sound when you rub the wings together or rub the wings against the abdomen. And you've heard of cicadas, those beetles that make a huge noise. If you've ever been in the subtropics, massive noise in the forest there. So this was all, you know, happening in the Carboniferous. Grasshoppers stridulate, of course, crickets. And the flashing, in this case, was using light, but who knows whether some of these insects were bioluminescent. We don't know that yet, but why not? So this is about lineages of different insects that produce light and or sound going from the Carboniferous. So the oldest evidence is here for, let me think, they've got little symbols here. So light flashes, but probably reflected light, might have been luminescent as well. Certainly reflected light, started in the Carboniferous. We also have this one here, which is stridulation, which is what a grasshopper does, a cricket. And we have, what else have we got? Oh yeah, we've also got some light flashing here as well from the dragonflies, Odontoptera. But other things came later. So castanet sounds, crepitation, which would be the cicada type of sound, crackling sound. Another fantastic discovery now are some beautifully preserved mayfly-like insects from the late Carboniferous in China. And these are so exquisitely preserved in lake sediments. And here they just got a reconstruction of it, resting on a horsetail calamites, which is a common plant fossil that you find particularly in the coal measures. And what the detail on this insect is just absolutely amazing. It has all this modern sensory apparatus on it, all over its body, tiny little hairs, which we know from modern insects, and monitoring airflow, monitoring sound, vibration, and these long things at the back are all to monitor vibration as well. And they can use that information to change the trim of the wings, and dragonflies do this. So dragonflies, not only do they, with having double set wings, gives you this efficiency in powered flight, it gives you incredible maneuverability. So I was at Bristol University and I did geology and zoology, and the geology department was in the same building at the time as the aeronautical engineers, many of whom had been involved in designing Concorde. And I used to share the copy room with them. I used to talk to them about, I did a module in animal flight under Colin Pennycrick in zoology, and in modern animals, ancient ones. And I used to talk to them about all the features, in flying foxes and birds and what they do and some insects, how to reduce stalling speeds, and better maneuverability and all this sort of stuff. And the structures that they had. And I said, you should look more at nature, they've been doing it for billions, a third of a billion years, things have been flying around. You can learn from that. And I look over aircraft wings now and I start to see some of these features actually in the design of the aircraft wings. It's quite remarkable. But these things, we talk about, modern aircraft with autopilot, and the plane can fly, on computer with all the sensory stuff all over it, and insects were doing the same way back in the Carboniferous. It's quite remarkable. And dragonflies in particular, they can change not only the wing aspect, but they can actually change the shape of the wing as well. And they can change the way the wings flap. So hence, they can hovercraft, they can hoverfly like a helicopter. They can, dart, very quickly accelerate and then put their air brakes on in the air. Amazing, to avoid a predator, that's obviously a very good way. It's just suddenly stopping in the air and the predator just goes flying past if the bird's after you or whatever. They can drop out the sky, can dragonflies, very quickly. And of course, they can capture other insects, so they have to be really fast to capture their prey. And it's just remarkable. I just find it absolutely remarkable that all that was going on in the Carboniferous. Other arthropods are very large too, which again is giving us clues as to the size of things. And this is a paper that came out during COVID, and it's from Northumberland, and it's from the Arnsbergian. So it's from fluvio-deltaic sediments on the Northumberland coast, and a dead one of these broken up. That's a reconstruction of the actual fossil. It's found in a big slab of sandstone that had fallen from the cliff. And this is a huge millipede type animal. It's not a pure millipede, but it's along that clade for millipedes. These things go back to the earliest Devonian, and they form a trace fossil called Beaconites, and live in burrows. And before then, these millipede organisms were all aquatic and marine. In fact, you can find stuff in the Lake District in some of the volcanic lake sediments there, which are lacustrine millipede tracks, which is amazing. Just the trace fossils, these track things here. These things got massive in the Carboniferous and Permian, huge. And again, well, how could they grow so large? They'd need a lot of oxygen to get into their system. How would they do it? So again, it's another clue that the oxygen levels were very high in the Carboniferous and Permian. The first ones of these, by the way, were found in the Lancashire coalfield by Woodward and the soapstone bed near Padiham. I've always gone looking around for it if there's an outcrop of the soapstone bed, and never managed to find one. They occur in little nodules there, not the whole millipede, just a few segments and things like that. But at that time, they didn't really realize what it was in terms of, an animal this size, huge. talk about the fishes. The lot of Devonian fishes died out, all changed in the Devonian. But the ray fin fishes really set off. So the jawless fishes all didn't get through from the Devonian, apart from the lampreys and hagfishes, which are amazing things. That's another story as well, which you can find in the rivers in northern England. But it's the ray fin fishes and the lobe fin fishes which really get going. So the Actinopterygii, these are your ray fin fishes, and some of these are your Sarcopterygii, the lobe fins. Here's a coelacanths. You find lots of coelacanths in the Carboniferous, particularly in the marine sediments. Scales of them are quite common. But this part here is what led to the tetrapods coming out from the late Devonian. And we'll be talking about them later on. The first tetrapodomorpha, probably didn't walk on land, even though they had limbs with digits. Probably walked half submerged or submerged at first. So you've got to be careful when you find tetrapod footprints in the Devonian. It doesn't mean to say they were terrestrial. But you can see all the big, lineages that lead to a lot of modern fishes really start here in the Carboniferous through the Actinopterygii. So you've got the Acupensa, chondrostine, where are we? Yes. I'm trying to remember what all these are. Again, I'm not a fish specialist. So you've got the teleos, which are a lot of the modern fishes are teleos, modern bony fish. Holosteans, there's a thing that lives in the Mississippi that's still a living fossil, a holostean. And we have the, I'm trying to think here. Oh yeah, these are, chondrostine, Acupensa, Polypterus. Yes, these we thought were paleolithics, but they're not. But they have shells like scales like that. They live in the Nile, and a fish that frequented our waters before the Industrial Revolution. In fact, the Trent at Nottingham was a major fishery for sturgeon, and this is a Carboniferous sturgeon. The earliest sturgeons appeared in the Carboniferous with these, like the modern sturgeon, these big plates down the body, and a fish that could go between fresh water and marine as well. Very similar to the modern sturgeon, which unfortunately I don't know whether they still come up the Humber, but and they used to come up the Thames as well. But I don't know whether we get them anymore now. I talked to you about eyes in dragonflies and their 360-degree vision. We also have the first evidence of colour vision in vertebrates. This is a fish found in a lake deposit in France, and you'll notice these pigmented eyes. It's beautifully preserved, this fish. It's a freshwater fish, and it's got very large eyes, and clearly its eyes are placed on top. This was a predator, and it needed its sight and vision to see what, it was living in the photic zone. And these eyes are so well preserved, you can see the retinas, and you can see the retina has rods and cones. So cones are what we have to see in color and also to enable sharp vision. Rods are more your black and white color, your night vision. So when you lose your rods, like in wet macular degeneration, which my mum got, you lose your color vision and you end up not being able to see anything where the rods were, because there aren't any lose your cones, there aren't any rods where the cones are. So you can't, once you lose your cones, you can't get sharp vision, and you'll only see in black and white, really. A very poor sharp image. Obviously nocturnal things specialize in having more rods, and they have better night vision. It's quite amazing, the earliest evidence there in the Carboniferous are modern retinas with rods and cones. I'm telling you about the early tetrapodomorphs. These are the Devonian ones here. A lot of Devonian stuff died out at this extinction event, but we're now getting a very interesting picture of what was used to be called Romer's Gap. And Jenny Clack, the late Jenny Clack, God bless her, it's such a shame she's died. Amazing female vertebrate paleontologist from Cambridge University. She's filled in a lot of this gap with these wonderful discoveries from, well, I would call professional collectors who first found them, but always respected science, and when they found important stuff of scientific importance, they got the scientists involved. So it just goes to show how those of you who are good at field work and spotting things, you can find stuff and really move science on. This Romer's Gap is a massive problem in vertebrate evolution, understanding what was going on, and it's now being filled from these discoveries, mainly from the Northumberland coast and the coast of southeastern Scotland. So what we see here is, this is in stratigraphy. So here we are in the middle of the Nemurian. We start to see things like this. This is from the Hawes sandstones in the Hawes cycle, Hawdraw cycle, sorry, but Hawdraw Falls. In fact, this fell out of the eroded river cliff there. It was found loose. But this is certainly terrestrial. You can see from the way things are dragged and the type of way it's walking, it's something like this here, like a modern amphibian would walk on land. And we'll go onwards. And the evolution of these stem amphibians, and then the stem amniotes here, which I'll talk about as well. It all kicks off in the middle of the Visay, and this is all the work really from Jenny Clack's meticulous work and her, people who worked with her to try and work out all this sort of stuff. And what we find incredible is in these amphibian clades, they start to diversify, and some of them go back into the water. So this is an amphibian version of a sea snake. Quite amazing. And some amphibians became aquatic predators, rather like a crocodile would be. And these are reconstructions, of course. But and we also see some amphibians became like legless lizards. They're not snakes, but like our slow worm. In fact, there was one YGS trip I ran. I remember, to the Bowland Fells, to the anticline, Sykes anticline, and there was a wood there in the quarry, and our two eldest boys were kids then, and they found a slow worm on the field trip. I don't know whether some of you can remember that, because they live under logs during the day and they come out at night. But they live in leaf litter and prey in leaf litter. So again, some of these designs were probably linked to the rainforests, and then finding they could swim as well and start preying back in, amphibians going back into the aquatic environment again. And I had inadvertently found one of these. Here it is. You can see this backbone here. And this is one of these legless amphibians. This is from what I believe to be a tsunami deposit. This is a large piece of wood, but everything's jumbled up here. This is a standing crop of ammonoids with mature ammonoids, semi-mature ammonoids, and baby ammonoids, all, chaotically deposited in some really terrible event. A lot of these things are broken and smashed up. This is a natural breakage here when it was buried, not due to me breaking the rock up. But here you can see this. I thought it was a plant at first, but now looking at it closely, I need to get vertebrate paleontologists to really look at that properly. I think these are chordiotes, these things. So what's really interesting in the Carboniferous is we get the split from the amphibians and the true reptiles to a clade which we used to call the mammal-like reptiles. So this is, and I'm trying to read this. Better read this properly. Carboniferous, yes, that's right. Here's the Mississippian. So you're starting to see things happen. Here is where you get the split from the reptiles, the true amphibians, and things that look like reptiles, but they're not leading to the reptiles. The lineage is already split. And that leads eventually to us, which we're down here. I can't see this diagram again because of the menu from the Zoom, but it all happens in those Carboniferous rainforests around that time. Here's a simplified diagram of that. So you have these things in the Devonian, which maybe could get on land for short periods, but probably were aquatic and could be semi-submerged. And then you come into the Carboniferous and you start to see proper amphibians. And here at this point, you get the split, which goes to the true reptiles up here. But the lineage that leads to us is not through the reptiles. It's through all this, all the way down here. We start to see, and these are fossils. Okay, I'm going to show you some evidence that some of these things happened earlier than what's seen on here. As far as we know at the moment, the earliest mammals are late Triassic here, earliest true mammals. And they're probably monotremes, monotreme-like things. But there seems to be evidence that things go further back when you start to look at the modern genetics and mitochondrial stuff and modern adaptations in the primitive mammals, the monotremes. I'll come on to that in a minute. So again, Carboniferous, very important time. And it's interesting when you look at the vertebrates that were living on land in the Carboniferous, you can look from their mouth parts, you can see what they're feeding on. So in the Visayan and the early part of the Nemurian, this is Mississippian here, Visayan Serpicovian, all of them probably feeding on fish. But as you get into the, this would be about the time of the Kinderscout grit, the Bashkirian coming in, you see insectivorous vertebrates. And then you start to see vertebrates eating vertebrates in the late Carboniferous, which is these colors here. And some of you botanists will know there was a crisis in the rainforests towards the end of the Carboniferous when things got a lot drier. And we probably had more savanna type vegetation. Things were getting drier and colder, the Gondwanan glaciation. And you ended up with open country. So you had browsers, things that were feeding mainly on plants on the plains. So, you know, you start to see things like this appearing, these therapsid type things, you know, precursors of them, just at the Carboniferous Permian boundary here. So what's really interesting is about the mammal clade. This is a paper in Biological Letters 15, and it's looking at one of the major things in mammals is their ability to clot blood. And lots of animals have developed an ability to clot blood, but the most efficient and effective one is what we have. And these are platelets, and these platelets are made in your bone marrow. So if you look at fossil bone, you can tell whether it had the right structure and ability to make platelets. So that's partly what this is doing. study. So it's looking at fossil bones. It's looking at modern mammals, and particularly looking at primitive mammals, the monotremes. That's the echidna. The echidna was in the news, by the way, yesterday. And this is absolutely true. Echidnas don't sweat. And the way they cool themselves is disgusting. But they basically blow snot bubbles. And the bubbles cause a large surface area to evaporate from them, and the bubble pops, and then they breathe in the cooler air from the bubble. It's absolutely disgusting, but anyway. Oh, to be a monotreme. No, thank you. The other monotremes are the duck-billed platypuses, which feed on freshwater bivalves, interestingly enough, which are very common in Carboniferous rainforests. Yeah, I thought they'll also feed on freshwater arthropods too, like crayfish and things. But that's why they have this duck bill. But the monotremes, as most of you will know, lay eggs like a reptile does. And the marsupials, they have a rudimentary uterus, but it's not big enough to grow anything big. And the young are born alive from inside the mother. And then they have to crawl into a pouch and attach to a nipple in that pouch, which is where they get, they're almost embryos. When they crawl into this pouch, they're not fully developed in any way. And they spend a long time in there suckling on the mother and growing in the pouch. Whereas we have the full growth of our embryos inside the mother, and the baby is born live from the mother. And to grow a large mammal, or a mammal like us, a very complicated mammal like us, you need a big placenta, and that's the thing that attaches the embryo to the uterus, and it literally fingers into the uterine wall. It's an invasive placenta, not just a loose attachment like a sucker or anything like that. So that means when the baby is born and the afterbirth has to be expelled, if you don't stop the bleeding, the mother will die. And sadly, that still happens to this day. It nearly happened to us, actually, with one of our children. But if the biology is working properly, your blood clotting is so good that the bleeding stops and the mother doesn't die. And that really is why the evolution of platelets, which this paper reckons happened in the Carboniferous, in the clay that led to us, to the mammals, that's when it started, pre-adapted us for having the modern placenta we have today, and why humans exist and very large mammals exist that can, like an elephant, with huge long gestation periods. So without that happening, that evolutionary thing happening in the Carboniferous, we would not be here. So I think I'll stop there. I think I've given you lots to think about, talk about. I hope you explore more of this. It's really exciting science coming out in comparing what the biologists are doing with the ancient. And I've always thought, whenever I demonstrated in practicals at universities, the postgrad and stuff, I always tried to bring things alive. Whenever you're looking at ancient rocks, don't think of them as rocks, think of them as living environments with all the restrictions and needs that modern ecosystems have as well. Although the players in the play might be different, they all have very similar needs and restrictions and limitations. Thank you. I'll open to questions.
Very much.
Thank you, Nick.
I'll hand over to Paul, who's going to moderate questions.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Mike Horn got the large crinoid right at the beginning, so well done, Mike. There's one comment come on, Nick, which is from Tony Smith. He says, it's not a question, it's information. Tony was once a mine geologist at Bolsover.
I couldn't hear a word of that because I'm in the East Midlands air traffic control, and when a plane comes over a particular trajectory, happens every evening nearly,
Okay.
it upsets my Wi-Fi, it completely obliterates. So I didn't hear any of that. Sorry.
Okay, it's just a comment from Tony Smith,
Okay.
who says this is not a question,
Yeah.
it's information.
Yeah.
That he was a mine geologist, once a mine geologist at Bolsover.
Oh, right.
And I think he's saying that the beast of Bolsover,
Yeah.
Erasipteron bolsoveri,
Yeah.
was from the Bolsover deep hard D3's face.
Okay.
And he,
right.
I think, is saying that he was responsible for sending the specimen to the Natural History Museum
That is
in London.
fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Such
I
an
think he
honor
actually wanted to say something if we could enable him
I'm
to
going to unmute him. Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
What's that? Does that? Oh, hang on.
It is amazing to have the person who found that here and listening to this talk. I love it.
Tony should be able to speak now.
Yeah.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Right, excellent. Well, I'd like to thank Nick profusely for his really interesting lecture, and say hello again to John Knight. I don't know if either of you remember me. I'm sure we have met on a few occasions. At the time, I was a geologist at Bolsover was one of my pits, and the faceman, Malcolm North, found the fossil. It had fallen out of the roof, the face, and he passed it on to his district deputy, Terry Judge, who was a qualified mine manager who was at faceman. And Terry was very interested in fossils, and he passed it on to me. And I'd never seen anything like it, obviously, and it was it just struck me as looking like a dragonfly. It was one broken wing, and I sent it off to the Natural History Museum, and all hell broke loose because eventually the face team went down to Blue Peter, and then we had a later trip to the Natural History Museum where Paul Worley eventually wrote a paper on it, named it Erasipteron bolsoveri, and shortly after that they found another meganeuron from the same face again from the roof. The first one has an estimated wingspan of about 6 inches, as I recall. The second one would have had a wingspan of about 2 feet.
Yeah.
Even the first one was, at that time, I believe, the largest fossil insect ever found in the UK.
Yeah.
I'm sure things have changed since. But I'd like to not only thank Nick for his talk, for taking over as treasurer. As a very general point, I'd like to emphasize the value of societies such as these for helping new geologists to network us such discoveries as the one I was lucky enough to handle are only publicized and eventually become part of the academic literature if people are both knowledgeable enough and have contacts who they can use. And another thing that happened in my early career was that the abutment and cutting is disused railway line.
Oh yeah, I know the one. Yeah, I've
near
looked at
another of my pits, and the Arkwright Drift Mine.
Yeah.
They were proposing to fill it in because it was there was an awkward bridge they needed to preserve.
Yes, I remember.
But I again got in touch then with Jolson, and they eventually made it sufficient cost to change the proposal. So the bridge was preserved, but the cutting remains the GSSP for the world. So my only
Van der Beckie marine bat, yeah.
Yes, and my third point was that you mentioned charcoal chunks that get preserved in coal,
Oh yeah,
and that are evidence of forest fires.
yeah.
and they are quite useful as markers within gold seams, because you get thin durane layers, perhaps only a centimetre or less. But they're obviously charcoal, just in randomly distributed lumps. But they are useful marker bands, but they illustrate the frequency of fossil forest fires in the environment at the time. So thanks again.
Thank you. Thank you for that experience that you've told us about as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. At the moment, there are no questions.
Okay.
Oh, something's just come in. Trevor Faulkner. Jed, do you want to try and see if Trevor wants to answer?
Yep, that's done.
Sorry, ask his question live. Yeah.
Trevor, you should be able to speak now.
Okay, I've unmuted.
Hi, Trevor. We can hear you.
Okay. Well, I just, for me, because I study caves, particularly in Carboniferous limestone. The other thing about the Carboniferous is the amount of limestone that's actually deposited on the seabed.
Yes.
Which to me is pretty important. And the other comment I have is that perhaps all this sedimentary limestone that we see on our planet might be unique in the universe.
Yeah, it's all the more interesting in the Carboniferous that there's so much limestone, because if you look at the chalk, for instance, which is a limestone, it's made up of planktonic calcareous microfossils, both plant and animal. And they went around in the Carboniferous. So all the carbonate detritus that is on this Carboniferous seabed was being produced on the seabed, nothing coming down from above that of any significance. Yeah. Whereas the chalk all falls down from above.
Yes, but there are fossils within the Carboniferous limestone.
Oh, there are. Yeah, there are a lot of foraminifera, but none of them are ones that float today like Libidurinas do, and form the oozes, which forms chalk. Chalk is forming today on our seabeds in certain places. But it is odd how much carbonate was being produced, and that obviously reflects something about the ecosystems and the biogeochemistry of the ocean at the time. Yeah, and a lot of what you see is crinoidal and echinoderm.
Yeah,
from with the eye. But if you look in thin section, you will see a lot of algae as well, calcareous algae, and you'll see a lot of foraminifera. But they're benthic; they're not things that float in the ocean like the modern chalks and the Cretaceous chalk. They didn't appear until, well, they started to appear in the Middle Jurassic, but it isn't until, you don't get proper chalks really until the Cretaceous.
I mean, the point I'm trying to make is that most of this limestone originates originally from life.
Yes. I mean, there are some limestones.
We have no evidence of life anywhere else in the universe at present. So, the sedimentary limestone is pretty well unique to our planet.
Some limestones can be produced by chemical processes.
Yes, I know that. Yeah,
abiotically, but yes, certainly if they found limestones, for instance, on Mars.
No, there's no limestone on Mars.
No, they haven't found it exactly, which is interesting because there's clearly been a lot of water on Mars at one time.
Yeah,
you would have thought limestones might have remained if they were there being formed by life.
So my theory is there's no life on Mars at all, ever.
And we know there are Precambrian limestones which are formed by organisms.
Yes.
Interesting, isn't it? Very interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for those comments.
Okay.
Yeah.
If anybody has any further questions, let's have them, please. There aren't any more at the moment.
One big question I have, and I have not had an answer, is why did we suddenly get the calcareous microplankton appearing when they did? why didn't they appear earlier in Earth history? What was it so special about the middle of the Jurassic when they all started to appear? Completely changed the biogeochemistry of the oceans, by the way, including the carbonate compensation depth.
Right. Well, I think that's going to be it.
Okay.
Nick, by the looks of
I'm
it.
going to go watch Manchester City.
I think you flabbergasted everybody. Yeah.
That's all right. Some people have seen it before.
Well, I haven't. I still enjoyed it. We've got something coming. Let's have a look. Let's have a look. Right. Jed, again, could you link Bill Young?
There we go. That should be Bill. Should be able to speak now. You can unmute yourself, Bill.
Hello. Yes, thanks. Just a quick question about the amount of limestone deposited. Is there any relation between that and the high concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere-ocean system?
Ooh, blooming heck. That's a good question. I don't know. I really don't know. I'm not a biogeochemist to that extent. I really don't know. I mean, I presume the more oxygen there is about, the less organic material will get preserved in shallower waters because it would oxidize. Yeah, I really don't know. There you are. I told you if I didn't know, I'd say so.
Just an interesting observation, though, Nick and Bill, is, you think, so the Carboniferous had quite vast expanses of carbonate platforms in the same way as that Mesozoic, those Mesozoic carbonate platforms did. And you wonder just whether that's all tied up with this system of generating, high oxygen concentrations and things like that, and also the proliferation of particular life forms, as you were saying, the appearance of the microplankton in the Carboniferous, the appearance of a lot of those kind of filamentous calcareous algae, which were really quite not that abundant until that point, and then they suddenly proliferated almost like kind of calcareous seagrasses.
Well, you didn't get seagrasses in the Carboniferous.
No, but I'm just saying they almost filled the niche of the seagrasses. And formed mounds and all sorts of things.
Yes, that's true. Some of those limestones, though, may be from bacteria, methanenergetic. Ones that feed on methane. So the big Walsalltian mud mounds, for instance.
So a lot of those ones, yes, definitely.
They're probably linked to methane seeps, even if it was biogenic methane, not necessarily thermal thing. And the carbonate was a byproduct of their metabolism. But there were no corals, you see, to build structures.
No, that was it.
Perhaps some of the grazers that would have grazed on these bacteria were wiped out in the Devonian II extinctions, so these mounds could grow freely. They are, very common, as you pointed out, particularly in the Turnasian. The really big Walsalltian mounds. They just kick off, but not very healthily, in the earliest Spizaean. And you don't really see the same things again. I mean, even the Craco reef knolls on the edge of the Astric block, which are slightly younger, they're very different to Walsalltian mounds. And they do start to get reef builders in.
You get structure in them, and as you move up into the Carboniferous, but still that predominance and commonness of these kind of filamentous calcareous algae are very, very distinctive to that, to the whole of the Carboniferous. And you go over to the States or to North Spain and places like that and look at what you think of as mud mounds there, and they're just replete with these.
I've seen those. The Walsalltian mounds definitely started off in aphotic conditions, because we can work out the water depths of them.
Absolutely.
Although they can grow into the photic, so remarkable things.
As you say, everything happens in the Carboniferous.
It does. It really does.
So maybe I should draw tonight to a close, and just thank you, Nick, for a super talk. As I said, it all happens in the Carboniferous. It was this massive expansion of life in all its forms.
Absolutely.
And it was, I think, as you say, it was the contemporaneity of these expansion of these rainforests. And you imagine walking through a Carboniferous rainforest and being hit by this cacophony of sound, just as you see in modern rainforest.
Yeah, but it'd all be insects making the sounds.
All the insects, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then also the expansive carbonate platforms. And so you've got this perfect, not perfect storm, but this perfect coming together of these two things, given this expansion of life.
Yeah.
What I loved about it is, it was taking paleontology into paleobiology. And and that's what the future is, the excitement of creating real life out of what were fairly these inanimate stone fossils and everything. And I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I think that's what really what an excellent talk. So thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you
for giving us the time to come back and give the talk that some of us missed at the AGM. All right. For everybody else who's still on the call, our next webinar is on the 30th of March, when Richard Madra is going to come and talk about who bit my ammonite. So it's the silent witness. It's the silent witness talk in that sense, and the pathologist's tale. Elsa Pancaroli, who was going to talk next month, has actually had to change, and she's now going to talk to us about early mammals in on the 27th of April. So we've got two good webinars coming forward, as well as the indoor program that's coming ahead as well, with Nick Shaw's Stand Edge meeting coming up. So I hope to see some of you there. Hope you can all join the next webinars. And thanks very much for joining us tonight. And thanks again to Nick. Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers, Nick.
Good night, everybody. Thank you, Jed, for helping set up.
Cheers,
Thank you, Nick.
Cheers, John.
See ya. We go.
The recording has stopped.